Alright guys, welcome back to the channel, it's Maddie here. Now we're going into the third week of the Secluded Springs season, and a lot of people might assume that the metagame has been completely figured out. We know what all of the best decks are, right? What decks you should be playing, what the matchup spreads look like, and which decks are viable. But what if I told you that's not necessarily the case? Oftentimes at the end of seasons, certain deck lists kind of come out of nowhere and perform well in some of these online competitions. These deck lists can also be played and do well in ranked battles. So what we want to do in today's video and what I'm going to do is showcase a handful of decks that have been performing very well in recent online competitions, but are not something, these decks are not things that most people play. These are very uncommon decks, very unexpected decks, but I wanted to showcase them nonetheless. Again, things can get stale later in the season, and I want to try to refresh the metagame, and I want to give people as many options as possible for deck lists that can perform well, but aren't necessarily maybe considered, the top of the metagame. So let's dive right in. Again, these are all winning deck lists. These are all, real examples of decks that did well in online competitions. And big shout out to all of the players that played these deck lists, which we will also be, talking about in this video. So the first deck list that we're going to take a look at is from Laquita. I don't know how to say the name. He's from France, and he was playing Ampharos and Raikou. He went 5-3 at the Jules and Pabsby, I don't know how to say the name. The cup here, the number 6, the $20 prize pool cup. He went 5-3, a really cool deck list. And I think that Ampharos is something that I think a lot of people kind of slept on. Now, I do really love Zeraora in this current metagame. It gives you some advantage when you go first. And I think that going first can feel really bad, especially when you're playing into Suicune. Their ability to not only be ahead on the prize race, but at the same time, draw extra cards with Suicune and set up that crazy board state. There's a lot of different lightning decks floating around in the metagame, but one thing is for sure is that lightning decks seemingly typically have a really good matchup into Suicune, not only because they hit for weakness, because they're but also because they're very fast-paced and aggressive. So this deck list is playing 2 Zeraora and 1 Elemental Switch. Again, Zeraora is actually a pretty decent attacking option, especially in that active spot when you go first, because we are hitting for weakness onto Suicune. So if they don't have Irida and they don't have Giant Cape, hitting for 70 damage twice actually does allow you to KO a Suicune, and 90 HP is nothing to be slept on. It actually makes it pretty difficult to, to get KO'd by Suicune on their second turn, even if they do, of course, go second. And then, of course, even if we're not leading Zeraora or going first, we can still bench it and have that additional energy to kind of move later in the game to one of our other Pokemon with Elemental Switch. One Raikou as well, because I do think Raikou is a very strong card, very strong going second as a leadoff option. However, it's also a Pokemon that allows you to draw cards, just like Suicune does. But the main difference for this deck list is that we're playing Ampharos. And Ampharos is a very interesting Pokemon, right? Something that also came out, I believe, in Secluded Springs, although it might have come out in A4. I actually kind of forget. It did, yeah. It came out in A4. It's in the Lugia pack. This card is actually not that bad at all. It is a Stage 2 Pokemon, 150 HP. So we're in kind of that threshold of Magnezone. But instead of being a 3 energy attack cost, it's a 2 energy attack cost. And it has Thunder Punch, right? So it does 80 damage, and you flip a coin if heads, this attack does 40 more damage, but if tails, this Pokemon does 20 damage to itself. So it is a little bit of an RNG card, but you got to keep in mind, hitting for 120, 80 plus 40, plus the weakness actually is a 1-hit KO on Suicune, and I think that's actually pretty advantageous considering the metagame right now, but 120 damage is just a lot. It actually KOs just a variety of different Pokemon right now, and 150 HP is really nothing to sleep on. Let's go back here. We spoiled the next deck. It's all good. So I actually kind of like Ampharos. So with Raikou, we can play the rare candy stuff. We kind of play this very similarly to how Suicune, plays Greninja in rare candy so that they can set that up. Now, Ampharos isn't providing value unless it's in the active spot, which again is a big reason why we are playing 1 copy of Leaf to kind of retreat out, but also why we're only playing 1 Raikou and then 2 Zeraora. So I think that this deck list can function as primarily a single prize attacking deck list that is very interesting. And I think that Zeraora, like I said, is a strong leadoff option, a very fast-paced Pokemon, a very decent leadoff Pokemon since it generates that free energy on your first turn. Ampharos is a bit of a high roll card, right? Not only do we have to draw the evolution Pokemon and rare candy, but we are playing Will to flip that head, flip the heads on the coins so that we can guarantee at least that we are able to 1-hit KO things like a Suicune. I think that Ampharos is a little bit underrated. And like I said, there's so many good lightning type cards in the format right now that it does make things a little bit more interesting in terms of the matchup spreads, right? Because the most played deck, at least in tournament settings, settings is going to be Suicune. So when you're playing all of these different lightning Pokemon, you can at least have that type of an advantage. So this is definitely a bit of a counter meta deck list, but I think that Ampharos is actually not that bad of a card whatsoever. For those of you that love to play Will, this is definitely going to be a really, a strong counter meta option, right? Doing 120 for 2 energies is pretty decent on 150 HP Pokemon, as long as we can get that rare candy combo out. I actually really like Ampharos. So shout out to this deck list. Shout out to this player here. A really, really fun deck. There's a couple of examples of people playing this deck list that actually did quite well. So again, there's a lot of lightning deck options out there, but I just wanted to showcase this Ampharos deck because it's something that we really haven't seen that much of. Now, let's talk a lot about Junk Horde from the United States here. Went 6-4 at our Pocket Mads Pocket Tournament, actually, a couple of weeks ago. He went 6-4, and he was playing this absolutely ridiculous 14 Pokemon fighting type deck that I just really wanted to showcase. I've actually wanted to talk about this for quite some time. There's going to be a number of decks actually in this video from our tournament a couple of weeks ago, and they were actually pleasantly surprising, right? So our tournament was like 10 rounds of best of 1, which means that a lot of deck lists were able to kind of at least be above that, 50%, 60% win rate threshold. And of course, this deck list won 60% of its games. Let's take a look at this deck because it is absolutely ridiculous. Just an absolute mashup of single prize fighting Pokemon that, really don't get a lot of shine. So far in the metagame, fighting Pokemon have been struggling quite some time. I think that all of the fighting Pokemon that a lot of people try to play just end up being a bit of a struggle, right? Donphan just leaves a little bit to be, I don't know, it leaves a little bit on the table, right? And things like Garchomp have fallen out of meta play. So a lot of the EX fighting Pokemon just don't really cut it. Poliwrath is another example, but I do think there's a lot of strong non-EX fighting Pokemon. And in a metagame right now, of course, that is very heavily dominated by counter meta decks. A lot of Oricorio, a lot of those lightning type Pokemon with low amounts of HP. We can play a deck list like this, which is kind of counter to the counter meta. And again, this player went 6-4. So let's take a look at the deck list. We are playing 2 copies of this Dugtrio, which again came out in Secluded Springs. Cliff Crumbler. My gosh, it's so hard to say some of these things. This Dugtrio is really, really interesting. 40 damage, and you discard the top card of your deck. And if it's a fighting Pokemon, we do 60 more damage. So for 1 energy on a stage 1 Pokemon, we can potentially deal 100 damage, right? Which is a lot. But again, a very inconsistent attack because we have to play a bunch of fighting Pokemon in order to utilize Dugtrio. And that also makes things just a little bit awkward because if we're playing a bunch of fighting Pokemon, there's no guarantee that we're going to have Dugtrio available. So we are just playing a bunch of aggressive fighting Pokemon that are all very strong leadoff options other than Marshadow. But Marshadow is a strong Pokemon in its own right, able to deal 100 damage for 2 energies. We're playing 2 Tyrogue, 2 of the baby Tyrogue, which is going to be a really strong card into various different lightning decks. It can 2-hit KO or Oricorio. Just a pretty strong little leadoff option, allows us to attach energies to some of our bench Pokemon, like a Marshadow. We have Hitmontop, which does 20 to the active and 20 to the bench. We have the old Stretch Kick Hitmonlee to hit for 30 on the bench. Hitmonchan, which can deal 30 to the active. We have Carbink as well, which is a very interesting Pokemon. Flip a coin of heads during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage and effects done to this Pokemon. So it's a bit of a trump card, right? Only 30 damage, but it has the potential to basically take no damage on your opponent's next turn, which is pretty funny. And then Sudowoodo, which does 50 damage to EX Pokemon, and this will be 2-hit KOing things like Raikou and Tapu Koko, which is actually, a lot of merit to Sudowoodo right now if you take a look at all of the cards in the metagame. So, a deck list like this is very, very interesting. Again, the idea here is to build a deck around Dugtrio and maybe Marshadow, but you have to play a bunch of other Pokemon. So we're playing one-ofs of all of these like somewhat, useful fighting Pokemon that are a little bit lackluster. But when you keep in mind that especially on the ranked ladder right now, you're going to be going against just so many of these anti-meta lightning decks that are everywhere. So fighting Pokemon actually, I do think, have some type of advantage. They have the potential to be somewhat viable in sort of this counter meta pocket, right? And I think that's the type of stuff that you see when you go into like the 2nd and 3rd week of these seasons. So anyway, a really interesting deck. And honestly, this player went 6-4. Let's take a look at his matchups here. Played a bunch of non-lightning decks, which is actually even more surprising. He lost to Giratina Darkrai, Pikachu Arceus, but then beat Flareon Leafeon, beat Espeon Sylveon, lost to Guzzlord, beat Charizard, beat Suicune, beat Silvally Rampardos, and then beat a Guzzlord to end the tournament. So ended up not playing really any lightning type decks, but still had a very, very solid performance. A deck list like this, I think, has a little bit more merit, and also forcing your opponent to KO 3 Pokemon is not something that typically happens in the metagame right now. Most decks are playing a combination of EX and non-EX Pokemon, so it's very likely that, most games your opponent will lose if you take 2 KOs. So playing a pure single prize archetype right now actually has some advantages, and like I said, excuse me, so many lightning decks and Oricorio decks floating around right now in the metagame. A really, really fun deck that I actually am kind of excited to talk about. I've wanted to talk about this deck for a little bit. Next up is going to be a Suicune deck. Mox Papa from the Philippines went 6-4 again at our Pocket Mats tournament a couple of weeks ago, and he was playing a Suicune deck, but a very different Suicune deck that wasn't playing Greninja. This is what I would classify as like an ethical Suicune deck list. Really, really cool. Again, another deck that I would love to showcase here. So we're going to do it in today's video. This is Suicune with not only the new Milotic and Mantike, but with the Gyarados, the Wild Swing Gyarados. So the whole idea with this Suicune deck is to not play Greninja, not play Giratina, and to basically use this Gyarados here as your secondary attacking option, or even one of your primary attacking options. A really, really fun Pokemon here. Let's take a look. So this Gyarados does 20 damage, and you can discard any number of water Pokemon from your bench and deal 40 damage for each bench Pokemon that you discard this way. We're playing a lot of water Pokemon in this deck list. This allows us to hit for, I think, 140 damage, which is enough to KO a lot of Pokemon. So this is more of a late game kind of sweeper card. It's kind of a trump card here. We can lead with Suicune, we can get set up, and then finish the game by KOing with this Gyarados card. This deck list is really, really fun. We're playing Mantike to set up Suicune and Gyarados on our second turn consistently, and then we're playing one Milotic, right? And the cool thing about Milotic is that it basically provides value once it evolves, but then it's kind of just sitting on the bench and it doesn't really do anything, right? So Milotic actually works quite well in this deck list because once we evolve it, we can heal, right? Our water Pokemon for 60 damage. That's what Milotic does. And then after you heal, it's not doing anything, so then we can go into Gyarados and then use it to kind of just discard it and then generate some more damage for Gyarados. I like this deck list, right? We're playing one Fishing Net and one Fisher. These are cards that help you recycle water Pokemon. We are playing one Misty and one Irida, so a bit of a faster paced, more aggressive water type deck with Mantike and Misty. I really like this Suicune deck. You know, I wish that Greninja wasn't such a dominant force in the metagame. If Greninja wasn't so strong, maybe if it was like nerfed or banned or just not available, if Greninja just didn't exist, you know, I think that water type decks would actually be a lot more interesting. They would be a lot more freely able to play a bunch of different cards that are a lot more interesting and more dynamic in the metagame. I do think that Greninja is just a strong card. It just makes sense to play things like Greninja and Cyrus if you're playing Suicune. But for those people that maybe wanted to play a water deck or wanted to play Suicune but didn't want to play the whole Greninja shenanigans, I think this is a totally viable option. Again, I think that the metagame would be in a much better place if Greninja didn't exist, and I really, really like this version of Suicune. So this is my example here, or you know, this player's example of, I would call like an ethical Suicune deck list. A really, really fun deck that I wanted to showcase, and I think water has a lot of merit. Even beside, you know, the Greninja stuff, you know what I mean? I just really wish Greninja wasn't everywhere in the metagame, quite frankly. But yeah, here you go. Here's my Milotic, Gyarados, Suicune. It went 6-4, so definitely an impressive performance for this player here. Next up is going to be Where is Abdul from Great Britain. He went 5-3 at the Jody's Coliseum this past weekend, and he was playing Dragonite EX, but he was playing a Dragonite deck with Zeraora, which I actually find to be very, very interesting. So again, the same reasons why I think Zeraora is really strong this metagame and all of those lightning decks, makes sense to kind of play it in Dragonite, right? So it's a strong leadoff option. It can provide you some early game advantages when you're playing against some of those water type decks, but it also generates lightning energies to be a bit of an energy battery that we can then use to move those energies onto Dragonite. And we are playing Mantike as well to generate those water energies. So there's some inherent synergy here. Zeraora is kind of a dual purpose Pokemon. It doesn't, excuse me. It doesn't feel great, of course, if you don't get Zeraora out early, right? That's sort of the big downside to Zeraora, but it definitely is a really strong card to lead off with. And because we're playing Mantike here, I don't know if we're playing dual energies in this deck list or just water energies. I really don't know. Probably playing dual energies, but still very, very valuable to be able to move that extra energy to Dragonite. Zeraora also is a free retreat Pokemon, so even if we just don't really utilize Zeraora, it's effectively going to have free retreat with that one energy. So even if we don't need to move that energy to Dragonite, we can, of course, just sort of use it as free retreat, as well as Mantike and Cleffa, right, for those Lie returns. Dragonite consistently has been performing as well as really any other deck so far this metagame, and you know, being a Pokemon with dual energy and you know, having a lot of different water and lightning type options, I just find it to be very interesting, right? So most Dragonite decks are playing like Mantike and Pichu, or they're playing only Mantike and only Pichu, and then playing only one energy type. I think Zeraora actually makes quite a bit of sense because, like I said, not only can it generate those lightning energies, but it can work work as a very aggressive attacking option into those Suicune matchups, which I think is honestly pretty valuable. The only thing about Zeraora is that it requires 2 lightning energies to attack, right? So in a deck list like this, there's sometimes you're going to have water energies in your energy zone, which means that Zeraora will be limited in its ability to attack early in the game. So maybe we are playing only lightning energies, but probably not, you know? We are playing one Cleffa as well. Cleffa has really only seen play in Dragonite decks, which I find interesting, but I think Cleffa actually has a lot of potential, specifically when Mega Pokemon come out, you know, specifically like those evolution Mega Pokemon, right? So when we do get those Pokemon in the game, I think Cleffa is going to actually have a lot of merit as a Pokemon that we can kind of just throw away, force our opponent to kind of KO it, but we're just drawing Pokemon, allowing us to potentially go into that really big, really strong, you know, stage 2 Mega Pokemon. I'm really curious to see what the metagame looks like when the Mega Pokemon come, but I think a lot of baby Pokemon are going to see a lot more play. I think they're going to be very integral to the metagame once we get all of those Mega Pokemon, which we don't really know when they're coming, potentially coming at the end of this month or late October. We really don't know yet. We're waiting for some news about all of that. But anyway, kind of a different Dragonite deck that I wanted to showcase because I really just think that the Zeraora stuff makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of a crazy tech. It's kind of a crazy tech inclusion with Dragonite. Speaking of things that are crazy, yeah, that's right. Almost 50%, literally almost half of you guys that watch my videos are not subscribed. And I'm just here to tell you, you know, consider hitting that subscribe button. It supports me. It supports the channel. We cover all of the decks, all of the metagame, everything that you need to know about competing in Pokemon Pocket and playing all of the best decks. We cover it here on the channel. You guys know what we're about. If you like the content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I would really, really appreciate it. Next up, we've got a Lanturn Galvantula deck. That's right, went 4-4, so actually went 50-50 at the Jody's Coliseum, but I really like Lanturn, and it also plays Galvantula. I really, really like Galvantula as a card, so I wanted to showcase it here in this video. By the way, if we go back, the player here, Porksgas, I don't know how to say the name, but shout out to you. This is his Galvantula and Lanturn deck. So, you know, Lanturn is an interesting Pokemon. Again, it's lightning type. So in a format heavily dominated by Suicune, being able to take KOs is actually fairly interesting. But we are playing 2 copies of Memory Light here, right? So we got to keep in mind, Memory Light is a very, very interesting card that has a lot of potential applications. So Memory Light for Lanturn can utilize Chinchou's attack here, Luring Glow, which you flip a coin of heads, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot, can be a bit of a control card, but we can also play Memory Light with Galvantula to use Joltik's attack, which again only does 10 damage, but if you flip a coin of heads, your opponent's Pokemon is now paralyzed. So we can do a little bit of chip damage and paralyze, right, with Galvantula, or we can go ahead and switch your opponent's Pokemon with Lanturn, and we are playing 1 copy of Will, so a lot of coin flips. This is another Will deck, which inherently are fairly inconsistent decks, but this is a very, very creative strategy. Galvantula does 70 damage, and it discards all of the energies, but you do guarantee paralysis, and that is actually, I think, kind of a big deal, because, again, it allows us to kind of wait an extra turn, right, which means we get an additional energy, and hitting for 90 on water Pokemon is pretty substantial. Lanturn, of course, for 3 energies does 80 damage, and you have the opportunity to either paralyze or confuse your opponent. Both really interesting cards. Lanturn is a card that can actually sweep through water decks pretty effectively. It does have 150 HP, and it does for 80 damage, which honestly is kind of significant. We're playing 2 Pichu, 2 Elemental Switch. Now, of course, you could, just play like Zeraora in this deck instead of Pichu. I think that also could be a pretty valuable strategy, but like I said, there's so many different lightning decks. A really, really cool example of a creative lightning deck that I think has a lot of merit. Again, is this going to be better than playing things like, you know, Raikou or Tapu Koko or things like that? You know, probably not, but it's just another option. And again, I think that in a format heavily dominated by all of these water decks and by Suicune, there's a lot of opportunity for some of these, you know, less, I guess, you know, less popular lightning decks and less popular lightning Pokemon to see play. So big shout out to Lanturn, a really, really cool deck list, and I really did want to showcase it. Even though it only went 4-4, that is a 50% win rate. You know, it definitely is an interesting deck, so I wanted to showcase it. Okay. Next up is going to be Hyperion N from Finland here at Jody's Coliseum. He went 5-3 this past weekend, and he was playing just an absolutely crazy like baby Pokemon deck list. I don't really know what to call this, but this is going to be Dark Arceus with Tyrogue and Snorlax. So I don't know what's happening here. Effectively speaking, it's just a bunch of baby Pokemon with Arceus and Darkrai, but also Snorlax. And we're playing Tyrogue as well, probably for those Oricorios. Just a massively interesting deck. I don't know what's going on here. So many different things happening, but one thing is for sure is that we're definitely getting that bench full for Arceus to deal the damage, right? We're likely going to lead with either Mantike or Magby. This deck is almost all, you know, Pokemon, so it's very likely that we're going to lead with any of these baby Pokemon, which are all strong leadoff options. And then, of course, We're going to use those Pokemon to set up either Darkrai or Arceus or Snorlax, you know what I mean? It's interesting to see Snorlax and 2 copies of Snorlax in a deck not playing Irida, but again, I think that Snorlax can get set up with Pichu, with Magby, with Mantike, and then kind of steamroll your opponent, right? It's really hard to KO Snorlax in this current metagame, and with Giovanni, we are hitting for 140, able to take KOs on a lot of Pokemon right now. A really interesting card. I think Snorlax actually has a lot of potential. I don't really know what was going on with this deck. It really does just look like an absolute mashup, but sometimes when you just play so many different Pokemon, your deck at least always does something, right? And that inherently is pretty valuable. Playing 2 Darkrai, 2 Snorlax, 2 Arceus with not any Illima or any Leaf in the deck is a little bit crazy. So we're definitely rolling the dice a little bit in terms of which Pokemon we lead off with. But to be fair, we're playing 7 baby Pokemon, so it's pretty likely that we lead off with at least one of them, right? So that's the idea. Even though it's like half and half our deck list, chances are that we're gonna have multiple Pokemon in our starting hand, so we get the option to choose. So I think that's the concept here. If we're playing just only Pokemon basically in the deck, it's very likely that we're able to not only fill our bench, but almost always start with a Pokemon that has free retreat or is a baby Pokemon, right? Like the Mantikes or Magby or Pichu. So a really weird deck list. I don't really know what to think about this, but it did go 5-3 at Jody's Coliseum. So you know what? Maybe there's some merit to these types of just mashup decks. It's hard to really say. We've seen the baby Pokemon with Darkrai and Arceus and those Turbo Dark Arceus decks, but this is just a turned up to 11. I don't really have any other explanation for like what's going on with this deck, but I do like it. I think it's definitely quite interesting. And again, it did well at a recent online tournament. I don't have anything else to say here. I really don't. We've seen a similar deck list to this. I think that the Tyro tech there, really just mostly there probably because it's probably pretty good into a lot of the lightning decks that are seeing play. And then same with Snorlax. Like if you can get the 4 energies on Snorlax, like your opponent probably doesn't have the ability to kind of get around it, right? Now, the one thing about this deck is that it requires a lot of Pokemon, and, Suicune does more damage than the more Pokemon you have, right? But if we are just 1-hit KOing from our second turn onward, then yeah, we're probably going to win the game, right? So a really interesting deck, a really fun deck, and what, I just wanted to showcase it to you guys. Okay, we have 3 more decks to take a look at here. So the next one is going to be Decidueye. Yeah, so Decidueye is actually one of the more interesting Pokemon that has kind of opened back up. It's seen a little bit more play over the last week or so, and has been performing pretty well in a variety of online tournaments. This player here, Umbra H from Italy, went 5-2 playing basically just straight Decidueye, a really, really interesting deck list. I think that Decidueye has a lot of merit right now. A lot of these decks that can kind of carry their own without, playing a whole bunch of Pokemon, theoretically actually have a good matchup into Suicune, right? So we're playing basically just Decidueye. We're playing 2 Rowlet, 2 Dartrix, 2 Rare Candy, and then 2 of the Sniping Arrow Decidueye, as well as 2 of, Decidueye EX, right? The whole idea here, realistically, is that with Leaf Cape, with Erika's, with Lily, our Pokemon are going to survive for a very long time. Suicune, at the very, very most, can deal 80 damage. So as long as we can evolve into something, then, we're going to be off to the races. And I think that there's an opportunity for deck lists like this season, particularly these sort of, stage 2 Pokemon that can really just sort of get their own, board state set up without requiring other Pokemon, but also have a decent non-EX attacking options or just options for the card in general, creates this brand new kind of structure of a deck. Like you could do technically the same thing with something like a Charizard, although it would be more difficult probably to get the energies on. You could do the same thing, I think, with like Primarina is another example. So any of these Pokemon that have like a stage 2 EX Pokemon, but also a non-EX stage 2 variant, you could build just like this deck list. I think that Grass does have some advantage, mainly because we have access to Erika's and Lily, so we can play a ton of healing cards and Leaf Cape. I think that the Grass package actually has a lot of support, and like I said, similar to like the Guzzler deck, if we don't have any Pokemon on our bench, then Suicune can't deal that much damage, and most of the other counter Suicune decks don't deal a lot of damage either, so we're able to basically live for a very long time and then just whittle down our opponent. Decidueye can deal 80 damage, but we don't have to play Cyrus. That's the big thing about Decidueye. We can actually pierce the pain and deal 100 damage to any Pokemon on our opponent's board as long as it has damage attached. And the cool thing here is that we have the non-EX Decidueye, which can deal with Oricorio pretty well, so it really makes actually quite a bit of sense. I know that there's certain decks in the format that might, like this matchup, things like Turbo Flareon as an example, example, but in general, I actually really love this type of deck list right now, and I think we're probably going to see more types of decks like this when Mega Pokemon come out, things that are just completely independent, and Suicune's not going anywhere. We have to keep in mind, maybe they give us a really strong deck that is strong against Suicune next season, when the next, booster pack comes out and we get new cards, but Suicune's not going anywhere, so deck lists like this, as long as Suicune are relevant, actually have a lot of potential. I really like this deck. Now, of course, if we just don't draw, rare candy or our evolution Pokemon, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a struggle, right? But Rowlet can target bench Pokemon, so can Dartrix, so as long as we're not getting absolutely swept in our first 2 turns here, we can set up our stage 2 Pokemon with Leaf Cape, heal it up with Erika's and Lilies, and stay around for quite some time. We even have 1 potion in the deck list. I really like it. I actually like this deck. It's a bit of a surprise to me, but consistently been doing well. The last 3 decks in this video are actually what I believe to be real meta contenders. We took a look at a variety of different deck lists, some probably more viable than others throughout this video, but these last 3 decks I think actually have some real meta potential given the meta landscape right now. So shout out to Decidueye, definitely something I would consider playing. A bit of a high roll deck, a bit of an RNG deck just in terms of drawing your Pokemon, but if you do, right, going first, this deck probably doesn't feel that good, but going second and getting that turn 2 rare candy probably feels really good when we're playing this deck list. So again, very interesting. Shout out to this player and shout out to Decidueye, one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, and I would love it if it saw more play. Next up is going to be Giratina with Silvally. So we've seen this type of deck before, but at the Pocket Mats tournament, this deck went 9-2-1. I believe it actually made top cut, and it's been doing very well in various online tournaments ever since our tournament a couple of weeks ago, but really hasn't caught on. And I know some people have commented about this deck. Some players at the top of Master Ball actually have been playing this type of archetype, and I find it to be very interesting. So this player here, a Moose from Singapore, went 9-2-1 at our tournament a couple of weeks ago, but again, it's seen some more play since then. So this is literally just Silvally with 1 Mantike, right, which is a decent leadoff option. It allows you to attack with Silvally if we're going first, and then just 1 Giratina, right? So what's the idea with this deck list? To be fair, this deck is kind of all about, being able to have a Giratina, which can, sweep through some games for sure and 1 at KO Pokemon, but we're just playing Silvally. So we have team 1 Team Rocket Grunt in here, 1 Cyrus, 2 Gladion, 2 Red, 2 Mars, a very disruptive deck, a very aggressive deck list, but you got to also keep in mind that a lot of decks in the game right now don't really do much in the early game, right? It's not super common that your opponent is going to be doing a lot of damage early on in the game. It does happen with some of the turbo decks, but honestly, the lightning decks don't have a ton of early game damage, and then Suicune, of course, is more of a mid to late game deck list. So I think that Silvally actually makes a lot of sense. It can actually deal with a lot of those lightning type decks very well because it's an aggressive Pokemon, it's a fast-paced Pokemon, and of course, it can also KO or Choreo. So Silvally's really strong into those lightning type decks, but it can also kind of just stand up pretty well to Suicune and 2 at KO, especially going second. And then, of course, Mantike, if we go first, allows Silvally to attack, on that particular turn. The 1 Giratina operates in this deck actually kind of similar to Suicune, where we're not like always using it, but it's there for the games where, we can kind of pass and Broken Space Bellow and then have it for the late game potentially when we need to. So a very interesting deck. It's been, again, doing very well in various online competitions, and I think that Silvally's still a really strong card. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to play Silvally. For whatever the reason, this version of the deck actually has been performing pretty well. I'm a little bit scared of playing Mantike a lot of times, or any baby Pokemon with Greninja everywhere, but because we technically are playing, mostly single prize Pokemon, it's typically not that big of an issue. Team Rocket Grunt is a very interesting tech as well. It is a supporter card, so similar to, Variety, I think Penny was another one. There's a lot of these supporter cards that kind of fill the space of these Silvally decks and allow us to deal extra damage with Brave Buddies, but also potentially can do something, right? So Team Rocket Grunt, kind of just a supporter card that we can always play, which I think is pretty cool. 1 Rocky Helmet, 1 Giant Cape. Again, not a deck list that I've really played much myself. I haven't really tested it a whole lot, but I do know that it's been performing well, and some players really high up in the ranked ladder have been playing this deck list. So I think, again, the counter meta has really taken over. We played like a couple hours on stream last night of ranked battles playing, Raikou and Tapu Koko, and we played so many lightning decks. I think that throughout the entire stream, we only played like 2 or 3 Suicune decks. So especially on the ranked ladder, very common for us not to see a lot of Suicune. So there's opportunities to play certain decks that, necessarily aren't counter to Suicune or Suicune. They're just sort of decks that can capitalize on matchups into a lot of those counter meta decks. So I think this is a really fun deck. I would love to kind of test this a bit more. Comment down below what you guys think of this deck, because I would love to hear your opinions about it or any explanation you have as to how this deck necessarily, plays. Yeah, very cool nonetheless. And the last deck that we're going to take a look at is actually Skarmory. So Skarmory, similarly to some of these decks that we've seen today that are not playing a lot of Pokemon, Skarmory is one of those few cards that, again, is specifically actually really good into Suicune. Let's take a look at it. This is IMO Eddie from Brazil, who went 7-3 at a recent tournament. But Skarmory over this past week, in the the small sample size of people that have played it in online tournaments, actually has some of the highest win rate out of any deck in the entire game. And again, I think it's because of its matchups into a variety of different decks right now this season. So let's take a look at the Skarmory deck. So Skarmory's weak to fire, and there's not a lot of fire seeing play. Of course, we probably don't love playing Turbo Flareon, but against all of the lightning decks that don't deal a lot of damage, and then of course into Suicune, which requires us to have Pokemon on our bench, Skarmory is actually a very good option. So for 2 Metal Energies, we do 70 damage, and then during our opponent's next turn, we take 20 less damage from attacks. But we also have Jasmine, and we have Adamant, which is going to reduce the damage that we take even further. And we have Rocky Helmet. We have a lot of disruptive cards here. We've got Guzma, we've got some healing, we have Red Card, we have Mars, we have Repel. This deck list is really all about soaking up damage. That's what this is all about. Suicune can't deal a lot of damage to us if we don't have a lot of Pokemon on our bench, and Skarmory is going to reduce the damage we take by quite a bit, and we are 2 at KOing Suicune. The one Giratina here is going to be for those Oricorio matchups, because Oricorio does still exist, even though I don't think it's a really good choice currently in the metagame. People are going to play Oricorio just because, Lightning has become so popular as a counter meta option. So the one Giratina there allows us to kind of at least cover our matchup into Oricorio, but yeah, Suicune is one of those few cards, similar to like Guzma. This is like a very similar card and a very similar deck to Guzma, where we're just playing very few Pokemon, and most of the game we're only going to have one Pokemon on board in the active spot, right? And it's going to be able to survive for a very long time, and just sort of take advantage of that aspect of Suicune, which, can't deal a lot of damage if we don't have Pokemon on the bench. So, yeah, again, I don't really know exactly what's going on with this metagame. I think that Skarmory is just really one of those Pokemon that uniquely has a very good position into the metagame currently right now. I think one of the craziest developments going into this 3rd and 4th week would be if Skarmory emerged as a real meta contender. Out of all of the deck lists that we're talking about today, I feel very confident that Skarmory has the potential. Now, again, there's obviously going to be some matchups that we don't love going up against inherently. Some of those fire type decks just, very tough, like things like Charizard and Flareon, if you do run into them, are going to be a bit of a struggle. But we are 2 KOing most things in the format. We hit for weakness on Sylveon if you do end up playing those Espeon and Sylveon decks. And like I said, we're 2 KOing Suicune, 3 KOing at least if they have Irida. But yeah, we're taking very little damage. Jasmine plus Steel Wing damage reduction on the Skarmory ends up being actually just enough to kind of roll through Suicune, which, is really fun, actually. It's a really fun deck. It plays very similar to Guzzlord. I think that Skarmory has a ton of potential right now. Just a really uniquely well-positioned Pokemon in a metagame right now that seemingly was completely figured out. So again, the first half of this video, we took a look at a bunch of different decks that were unique and, maybe one-of decks that did well in tournaments. But towards the end of this video, I really think we were covering decks that deserve to see more play. These are decks that really have meta contention, possibilities. Like, I really think that Decidueye deck, the, Silvally Giratina deck, and the Skarmory deck have a lot of potential in this metagame. And I think that there's something that's, worth playing, worth trying. I think in tomorrow's video, we're going to do a gameplay video, maybe playing one of these decks and really testing them out, seeing how they perform on the ranked ladder. I'll be very curious to see which of any of these decks actually ends up being pretty good. So, yeah, you would think that Skarmory is weak to lightning, but it's not. No, it's actually weak to fire, which, that's actually a pretty big deal given the metagame right now. So there we go, guys. There's the video. Comment down below what you guys thought of these deck lists. Again, I wanted to make this video just because I think the metagame's gotten a little bit stale right now, and I think that there's a lot of really strong options that maybe some people don't know about or haven't really thought about. Typically, at the end of seasons, really some crazy stuff can happen, and I think we're about to enter into that territory. So I would love to kind of get ahead of the game and showcase some decks that I think, have a lot of potential. some people just in general aren't interested in playing the same meta decks every day over and over again, right? So hopefully this video gives you guys, some options, outside of the typical, metagame norms. I know I'm part of the issue because I cover all of the best decks on the channel, but we also cover decks, of course, that, don't see a lot of play, but definitely, have some success, right? I'm not going to showcase decks to you guys that aren't good, but I'm also not going to showcase the same decks day after day, right? We need some variety here on the channel, even though we are kind of the meta defining channel, that's what we talk about. We talk about the metagame but I honestly think a lot of these decks have real metagame potential. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Comment down below. Go check out the Twitch channel. We're doing more live streams here on YouTube and on Twitch. We just recently created that Twitch account, so been really fun. I appreciate all of the support. Stay tuned. We should be getting some like actual news about the upcoming updates to Pokemon Pocket, whether it is, you know, a next major set or some, you know, actual, you know, systems updates about the game. We'll have to wait and see. Really, we're kind of been in the dark the last couple of weeks. I understand Secluded Springs has only been out for about 3 weeks, but yeah, it's definitely kind of getting to that point where, you know, most people are really looking forward out of this metagame. But keep in mind, I think a lot of these decks have potential to kind of swoop in and really, you know, shake things up a lot, which is what I'm hoping for, quite honestly. So let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah, bye.